Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I am terrified to be talking to James Rose. He is the author of several books, but the reason I'm terrified is because we are talking about the scariest film I have ever seen, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which recently celebrated, its 50th anniversary, James?
Yeah.
It's half century of this horror is out there now. My first viewing of this film was as a much too young year-old, and we got a video from the garage, at the Shell garage down the hill, and we watched the first half of it. And then my friend's mum was coming home for lunch, so I quickly went back to my house where we didn't have a video recorder. And when I went back to watch the last half of it, the guy had taken the film back to the video shop because he was scared his mum will find it. And I never got to see the end. And that terrified me more than I can tell you. Years later, flash forward to me being in Italy. I was in my late 20s and someone had videoed it for me. No, someone had given me the DVD. And I put it on and I watched it thinking and hoping finally this will give me closure as I finally see the villains come to their just ends, only to be even more terrified by the ending that I saw. James, that's a long introduction, but it's just to show how much I care about this film, how glad I am to be talking to you.
That's a fantastic set of stories. I think my first encounters with it are as tortured as yours, really. I thought, in sort of thinking about this interview in the weeks leading up to it, about when did I first engage with it, and I initially thought it was seeing it at the cinema, the Phoenix Arts Centre in Leicester, in a sort of a rare one-off sort of screening, because at that point the film was still sort of banned, not available. But it wasn't. Thinking about it, I remember my parents were both youth leaders, and sometimes me and my brother would go and spend the evening with them while they were working. And while we were waiting for them to tidy up and pack up, we'd sit in the leaders' offices, and they used to hire out 16mm films. So I'd sit and look through the rank film catalogue, and I wouldn't read any of the descriptions. I'd just look at the pictures because I was about 12 or 13. And one of them was of Sally Hardesty tied up and gagged, with the hitchhiker looking at her with this skeleton sort of hanging in the middle of them. And it used to absolutely terrify me. I couldn't sort of have a frame of reference for what was going on. It just was something that I would look at, but was kind of repulsed by, but also quite drawn to. It was just this image that I kept sort of looking at. And a bit later on, a couple of years later, I remember, like you in the VHS rental, I would go into our local video store, which is no longer there, obviously, called Anchor Videos.
Shell, Anchor, it's all maritime with these video shows.
Yeah. Oh, the Anchor was a river near where I lived. So it was sat just off the river. So it's kind of appropriate, but it was kind of a strange, strange sort of name for a video shop. But they had a lot of pre-certificated pre-BBFC certification VHSs. One of them was like Cannibal Holocaust, things like that, Eaten Alive and City of the Dead. And of course, they had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I was too young to hire them out. But I would just go and look at these video covers, and the Texas Chainsaw one just had on it on the front in big letters, uncensored. And this picture, this sort of airbrush rendering of Leatherface with a chainsaw, blood dripping off it, blood all over his apron. So in my kind of viewing of it, there was this sort of mythology building up around it, this kind of myth of this film that was just really terrifying. On the back of the VHS, it said, "Can you survive?" So it was just this kind of mythical thing. And again, about probably another 10, 15 years later, I finally get to see it at the cinema with a friend. I don't know whether this is a false memory or not, but I remember the cinema being sold out because it was densely packed. I'd never seen it that packed before. But I think there were people sitting in the stairwell and people sitting in front of the screen, which I don't know if that is accurate or not, but I remember there being an awful lot of people there. The film started and it just went deathly quiet. Halfway through, the friend who I was with just turned to look at me and he said, "Why have you brought me to see this? This is incredibly sort of sick. It's disturbing. Why have you brought me to see this?" And I just took that as a sign of really good quality filmmaking. Not because he was distressed, but more because it had distressed him, that it had such an impact, and it was only halfway through. So I suspect we'd probably just got past the Pam on the meat hook scene, and possibly with Jerry going into the house. But yeah, it was around about halfway through. So perhaps everybody has these sort of stories about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's one of those films that lives up to the hype. I mean,
Definitely.
it's not scary. You know the blood splatter and all the rest of it. It's weirdly because it doesn't have that it's just so pervasive. I mean, you mentioned this in the book how the censors are baffled by it because there's
Yeah.
nothing to cut. There's nothing
Yeah.
that they could cut that would make this. You don't see the meat hook going into Pam. You don't see the guy getting his head sawed off. But you know all of that happens, but you don't
Yeah.
see any of it.
I think in that respect, that's the reason why that bit about the censorship's in the book is for that reason. It's sort of talking about really not this history of censorship or no censorship, but more of a testament to what its sort of quality is as a piece of film. Seeing that sequence with Hammond, Kirk having his head cut off, and Leatherface, first time you sort of see him really. In one hand, it's kind of badly done because Gunnar Henson is just lifting this chainsaw up and down, nowhere near the body, and nothing's really happening. It's slightly comical if you take yourself out of the situation. But if you put yourself in this situation and think about what's happening, it's absolutely terrifying because Pam's boyfriend has been murdered. She's on a meat hook and struggling to get off that's pierced in sort of a back, a spine. She's watching her boyfriend having his head cut off with a chainsaw by an incredibly insane individual who, on top of everything else, is wearing the skin of somebody else on his face. And it's just looking at it like that, it's a relentless bit of horror. It just, no, you can't look away. And if you do look into another part of the screen, you're seeing something horrific. Even the background is saturated with blood, and you can just see bits of like kitchen utensils, which is a bit weird. I think I say it in the book about how the chainsaws amongst the knives and the forks and the whisks, and it's just another kitchen utensil to Leatherface. But all the normal sort of kitchen utensils, like the forks and the knives, they're congealed with blood, or they've got chicken feathers attached to them. So the whole sort of mise en scène is sickening. It's not horrific, it's sickening. And it's just, I mean, it's in such an immense scene, but I think when you first see it, it really is setting you up for like it's just going to get worse, to be quite honest. From this point on.
I had a conversation with the great young horror director Rob Savage, who did Host amongst other
Mm.
films, and we were talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he said this remarkable phrase, which he feels like it's been found in a rusty bath. He doesn't feel like it's been filmed. It feels like someone's got into a deserted house and just found these film canisters. And
That is such a brilliant description of it because it feels very make do in a way. And that make do-ness, instead of devolving the film or making it appear sort of humorous or badly made, it only elevates the sheer horror of what's going on. It only elevates it, only amplifies it, it only adds to the greater mix that, like you said a few minutes ago, about the censors just couldn't extract that from the film. And it's such a brilliant description of it. That is absolutely a fantastic description of it.
when the film begins, we have this remarkable title sequence. Actually, well, let's get to that in a moment. There's one thing I wanted to ask you is because my viewing of it has been so traumatic, and honestly, if I put it on today in full, I can only watch it in full daylight, which doesn't help because the film takes place mostly in full daylight,
Yeah.
so that doesn't work. I am not one of these horror fans who shrugs stuff off and pretends to be harder than nails. I was really curious as I was reading your book how you survived multiple viewings of this film. I was sort of like, I mean, when you're describing the kitchen and everything, if you've got to sort of keep standing up and walking around and then sitting back down with a notepad, because yeah, or did you just do it all from memory?
I watched it completely just as a film to watch it, and it scared me. And like you, I think if you're going to be a bit standoffish with the film and say, "Oh, it's not scaring me," you're not allowing the film to work on you. You need it to work on you because that's the intention. So I was scared when I watched it, and then I watched it very, very slowly to get the detail. So I was watching a little bit, pausing it, and writing rough notes or little bits of paragraphs whilst I was watching it. So the first viewing, it's like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. Then the second viewing, that can take place over a whole day because it just takes so long to get through, particularly if you're writing a monograph like The Devil's Advocate, which is just a book about one thing, one book, sorry, one film. You need to be able to mine quite deeply into it, which is why I just said earlier about my sort of clarity of knowledge about the kitchen utensils really is because I just looked that closely because although some of those things might be unintentional, there is an intention in the mise en scène about what's going on. And then started writing it, and then I would go back to specific scenes. But in a way, going back to the specific scenes, it still retains its horror. It still retains its sort of terror. Like one of my favorite shots in it is the low angle shot of Pam getting up from the white swing, and it's low angle looking up essentially at a buttocks, looking at her shorts. So it's a very sexual image, and she's walking towards the house, and it just follows her. And you're kind of thinking, oh, that's quite a sexually charged image. We can see her long leg, thin legs, we can see her tight shorts, we can see her back. Then you realize that's what you're looking at. You're being told that there is nothing between Pam and the meat hook that's waiting for her. She's literally going to be dumped onto that with nothing, even the thinnest of things to try and protect her. But watching it in chunks, in that scene in particular, I couldn't quite initially, I just kept thinking, this is quite scary. This is quite unnerving. Is it because I know what's going to happen? But it's not. It's because of the constant drone of the gasoline generator that we saw about 5 or 10 minutes earlier. So you've got that juxtaposition of this mechanical, almost like farmyard bit of machinery, just making this awful noise on this otherwise beautiful pastoral day. The sky is that incredible blue. There's those beautiful white clouds, Pam, this beautiful young woman who's got her entire life ahead of her, thinks she's walking into a house to find her boyfriend, who's this all-American sort of hunk, who they're going to live together. They're going to have a lovely American family, but no, they've actually met the worst American family possible. They've encountered them by accident, and it's just slaughter from there. And I think Pam's horror begins from the moment she gets up, not from the bit where Kirk drops the tooth into her hand. That's for us. We know there's something wrong. But for Pam, it's just, oh, we're on a farm. That's weird. But then that's when her horror begins, and her horror is sustained, perhaps pretty not as long as Sally's, but we keep going back to Pam. She's not killed. She's not butchered. She's thrown into a freezer and locked inside a freezer. And we see her again when Jerry tries to get her out, but then she witnesses Jerry being having his head caved in with a lump hammer, and then Leatherface throws her about a bit, then chucks her back in the freezer. So it's just absolutely relentless and relentlessly frightening. But yeah, I think you've got to let yourself go in that film, or else it's just not going to work. I think I watched it a couple of days ago, just in little bits to remind myself of certain things in preparation for this. The bit where Sally escapes and Leatherface is running after her, I just ended up laughing. It was quite comedic. It was quite Tom and Jerry. But then there is a bit of horror in it because she gets caught up in the sort of the briars and the bramble, and her hair gets all caught up, and he's getting closer and closer and closer. And even though I know she doesn't get it, it's still terrifying. This incredibly insane character with a chainsaw is going to come and get her. So it's terrifying. Yeah.
There's no sort of special critic's pill you can take, which is going to absolve you of the terror. Okay, let's go. I mean, I love what you describe as that shot because it's such an artful shot. I think it was Gunnar Hansen's book where he detailed how they actually did the shot of somebody having to lift the seat as the camera passed under it, so it gives you the illusion of just disappearing. And that goes with what you were saying earlier about there's a sort of element, you say in the book, there's an element of documentary sort of cinema verite about the film. Rob Savage's point about it just being a found artifact rather than a made film. And yet there are also these incredibly artful moments. And the very beginning is linked to that because you're getting something which is almost like an abstract piece of art with isolated audio and a series of Polaroids. And what you're actually hearing and witnessing in fragments, and you will be revealed, is the creation. I mean, that whole beginning is almost like I don't know how to pronounce this word, but I'll give it a go, a syndicate of synendicate. You know what I mean? A small thing which represents the whole.
Yeah.
Like hands representing a man who's working on something or in a ship. It represents in miniature, in microcosm, the whole film because it's about somebody making a grisly artwork.
Very much so. That opening sequence is, watching it again a few days ago, that was another, it's just terrifying in a way because we hear all of those sounds and we piece together a narrative of earth being dug up, broken wood being broken with a shovel, those sort of things. And then you get that strange whining sound from the flashbulb, and we see these fragments of bodies. And then we have that ridiculously long and slow pulling back of that grisly work of art. But it doesn't cut, it just stays on it. And we listen to the radio. And that, to me, is sort of one of the points where we start to realize not just this whole film is this grisly artwork or this notion that we're going to encounter the people that have created this artwork, but we're also listening to perhaps a little bit of subtext in that everything that the news reporter talks about, the newsreader talks about, is just death and destruction. There's no let up at all. There's like an outbreak of cholera. An 18-month-old baby's been chained up to in an attic. Someone's just jumped out of their hotel window for no apparent reason as someone was going to follow them. It's just this relentless, almost like America is destroying itself. It's consuming itself in another way. So we've got this whole sort of conflation of things going on just in that one sequence. And all of the way through it, we're made to look at that. We're made to look at that hideous, grotesque, decaying body that's somehow been jammed onto a gravestone and wired to it. It's incredibly disturbing, but like you said, it's just basically saying to us, here's the whole film in a snapshot. And if you can get through it, you might be rewarded with some high quality filmmaking, some absolutely amazing sort of moment in horror cinema, and an absolutely fantastic ending, an absolutely extraordinary ending. But they're kind of bookend in a way, don't they? They're both shot in that beautiful sort of sunlight that Texas seems to get, that very rich red, very rich orange, and they're both sort of glowing. But then that sort of feeds into the subtext again. Everything's simmering, everything's hot, everything's just on boiling point, everything's tipping over into madness. And that's the pivot really of that scene, isn't it? We're going now into madness with these really nice, quite likable teenagers who are going to get systematically butchered.
Except for Franklin, he kind of plays against type because he's a character who's in a wheelchair, and so certainly if you were writing this today, you would feel pressure to make him the nicest character or the funniest, or give him some redeeming qualities, where he's I don't know, I almost get the feeling that he's been directed to sort of be a bit piggy, and he squeals a lot, and even before anything starts happening, he whines a lot, he's humiliated by the fact that he has to get out of the van and go into a bottle and what have you. So that in a way he isn't. But you also mentioned that he's kind of linked to the family because he's the one who, his family is from there. But he's also kind of impressed with how they slaughter people. Slaughter animals.
Yeah, he sort of dominates really the film for the first sort of 10 or 15 minutes, because we have that opening sequence, and then the title sequence is those sort of strange, almost like solar flares as we get the sort of the title credits. And then after that, it is very much about Franklin, and he's introduced in a very peculiar way. He's made a fool of straight away, perhaps unnecessarily, because like you say, he's humiliated when he comes out of the van, and then he tries to go to the toilet, and the van goes past, and the gust knocks him down the sort of the little hill that he's on, and he has to be got back in, and all of those sort of things. Then once he's inside the van, camera seems to be quite preoccupied with him. He talks about how hot it is. He talks about kind of the slaughter process, and he almost does it deliberately to upset Pam, because Pam keeps saying, can we change the subject? And he doesn't want to. He wants to talk about his family. He wants to talk about his uncle. He wants to talk about how cattle are slaughtered. And that's all setting us up for when they pick up Hitchhiker. And those two are they're sort of paralleled, aren't they? They both have a cut hand. They both share an interest in slaughter, and they both can have a sort of a dialogue. Then Franklin gets quite disturbed by the fact that he sets fire to the photograph of him, which is a very bizarre, ritualistic moment. But it's the trigger to boot him out of the van, isn't it? And allow us to get back into the van with the kids.
Is there something specific about that? Is there something you found in your research was, that links it to, Louisiana voodoo or something? Or is it just something they're making up?
From my research, I didn't find anything about what that actually meant. But to me, it is some strange ritualistic moment. I think if I remember correctly, Franklin says something like, he took my picture. There's some line of dialogue that almost implies that Hitchhiker has taken an identity or a spirit or some element of Franklin, captured it in the photograph, and then ignited it. But I think it's very strange, isn't it? He puts down the tin foil first. He makes it safe in a weird way, puts the Polaroid on it, puts what I assume to be some sort of gunpowder or something similar, ignites it, does that weird sort of dance whilst it flames up, but then quickly crunches it up. But the weirdest thing is, I think he puts it in his pocket or in his bag, his leather bag, and he's somehow put a curse on Franklin. And nothing's said, but it's implied that there's something mystical or something, like you say, something voodoo orientated or something ritualistically orientated. And it kind of pushes the film a little bit into sort of like folk horror. There's some sort of ritualistic elements going on there. And if you kind of think about perhaps like it was released a lot longer after the Chainsaw book was released, but Adam Scoville's Hours Dreadful, that notion of the folk horror chain, a group of people from the city going to an isolated location, encountering a group of people that have got their own rules, their own parameters, their own rituals, and ending with some happening or event, which is a sacrifice, so traditionally, I suppose, in The Wicker Man. But in the Chainsaw Massacre, it's these kids. And then there's that strange dance at the end. It's almost like he worships the sun. And it's very strange. And that ritualistic moment with Hitchhiker is pushing us towards that way of thinking that this family of men have got their own rituals, they've got their own society, they've got their own culture that's been born out of this, I assume, given all of the clues we're given, this economic decline of the slaughter system. But yeah, I didn't find anything specifically, but that would be my sort of interpretation of it. There's something I feel.
I'm kind of glad you didn't, because there'd been an element. I think that's the power of the film, is there are so many elements which don't link automatically to an explanatory framework that you go, oh, okay, they're doing this. Like he smears blood on the van, and I always feel that that's a marking that he's marked the van, you know. I was also thinking of Deliverance, which I saw recently, rewatched recently on the big screen. Special print that came from it was one of the test prints that was so it's true, it was rubbish quality, but there you go. Cinephiles love these little these little things. So it's so we get them going to the petrol station, and I think that moment at the petrol station, there's a real moment of comedy, and that will come back as well as sort of like they think this is the last bastion of the normal world, really, or you might retrospectively think that, but actually it's not. They've already entered hell, you know.
Very much so, because we've been told a couple of things, aren't we? We've been told about cooks that would have initially comes across. I think I did it in the book where I first called him the gas station owner, so that we know who he is, and in the context of viewing the film for the first time, he is just the gas station owner. It's only later in the film that we realise he's part of the family and that he's called Cook, for want of a better term. So I think the book shifts, and then I call him Cook, just acknowledging that sort of disparity in our understanding as an audience member. But we first encounter him, and he does seem pretty normal. And in fact, he warns the kids not to go. He tells them not to mess around. He tells them not to go on other people's property. But he also encourages them buying barbecue, which we know what the barbecue is. And again, that goes back to Franklin, because although I think Jerry comes out with because he goes in and asks where the nearest station is, the gas station is, because they haven't got any gas station there. He comes back with a bag of barbecue and hands it in. And when the bag's opened, it's given to Franklin, and Franklin takes out a sausage or what could possibly be a finger, a limb of some sort. And we're shown a low angle shot of him really biting into it. And the sound is amplified of sort of the cracking of the fried skin on the end. It's sort of elevated a bit and exaggerated a little bit too much. And it directs our attention to it. And then, of course, by the end of the film, we know that he's given them meat. He's given them human flesh to eat. It's mildly humorous because we've had a joke played on us, but it's intensely disgusting as well. He's forced cannibalism upon them. He's forced his way of living onto them. And he's doing that to everybody that passes through. And if you think about it exponentially, lots of people fictionally in that world have eaten human flesh without realizing it. It's quite funny and subversive, but it's also incredibly disturbing. And again, that's another incredible part of the film, is that it works on you after it's over, not just because it's horrific and incredibly disturbing, but you suddenly think, oh, that's what was happening there. That's why we saw that. Why didn't they listen to the man that was trying to get them to not do what they've done, when in fact he was only really sort of goading them? No, you shouldn't do that. I'm a symbol of authority. I'm an adult. Don't do that. And what do teenagers do? They're going to rebel.
Yeah.
So off they go, and they fall foul of him and his family. But he's a strange character in general, isn't he? Because he
He's the most frightening one because when he's captured Sally in the van and he's taking her back to the house, he does that thing of beating her and then going,
yeah,
"Oh, are you okay? Are you okay?" And beating
yeah,
her some more, and the look on his face of absolute savage glee while he's doing it, and then sort of fear. And he'll say later, you pointed out, "Oh, I don't like blood. I don't like the killing
yeah.
and stuff." It's just, it's just such an amazingly subtle horror that you could be murdered by someone who's going, now, don't make a
Mm.
mess,
Yeah, he's a contradiction, isn't he? Because I think the line from him that sticks out in my mind the most is he's captured Sally and he puts her in the back of his truck to take her back to the house, gets in the van, closes the door, and then notices he's left the lights on at the gas station. So he says something along the lines of, hold on a minute, I've just got to go and turn off the lights because of the cost of petrol, the cost of electricity. Hold on a minute. So he runs out and we're just left in the truck watching him. He switches the lights off, comes back, and it's just like he's got no worry at all about what he's done. And that's his horror. He's completely in control of what he's done. And he knows that he's got the time. He knows he won't get found because he's done it countless times before. And then he comes back in and off they drive. And it's just like, oh, I've left the lights up in the middle of this kidnapping. I'll just go and switch them off. And then he just escalates, like you say, and he oscillates between being very sort of childish and afraid to being extremely sadistic. Even he beats Leatherface quite a bit, doesn't he? And he
Mm.
orders Leatherface around, but he seems to be able to understand what Leatherface says, even though it's just this strange sort of childish gurgling and babbling. He seems to understand, but then he just repeatedly hits him as much as he hits Sally, and then he joins in very enthusiastically into Grandpa trying to kill her. I mean, he's just as mad, isn't he? He's just another
Yeah.
version of madness. He's
I,
just a
it's
shade of it.
it's that flatness of the moral universe that there's just no that and the fact that like Leatherface is this terrifying monster. You equate him with a sort of gothic version of the monster, or you talk
Mm,
about him in reference to that, and yet as you quote Tobe Hooper says he's the most frightened person in the film,
yeah,
and the fact that he's bullied.
yeah.
It's this huge guy who, in his family, is not this huge guy.
Mm. He's quite a strange character, isn't he? Again, because we see him as this all-powerful sort of entity at the beginning. That opening sequence with excuse me, with Kirk, it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen.
Oh my God, it scares me to this day.
It's it's just horrendous, even trying to put it into words what we're encountering, because we're hearing a pig, but we're not. We're hearing Leatherface. We're hearing his language, and what is he doing? Is he trying to draw that person in? Is he trying to frighten that person away? Is he just pretending to be a pig?
I was thinking that I always thought that the floor was some sort of rolling, that he didn't just
Yeah.
trip up accidentally, but it's
Hmm.
actually a trap. But like in what you would expect to get in a fun fair sort of house of
Hmm.
horrors, sort of a piece of moving floor that then it knocks him over and renders him helpless and
It, it,
defenseless.
it's the fact that he just appears, though, isn't it?
Mm.
Kirk's sort of leaning into that space, and then Leatherface just appears, and he fills that entire door frame. He's as wide as it and taller than it, and he brings that lump hammer down, and it's just over. But I think it's not just the sheer horror of what that is, but it's those quite well timed few seconds before Kirk's feet start kicking and spasming on that bit of wooden ramp. It's horrifying. And it's sort of Leatherface is confused. Why isn't he dead? I'll hit him again. And just whacks him one. And without any effort, hauls the body in and slams that metal door. And it's pure horror. It is absolutely pure horror. Because the one person that perhaps could save them, the American sort of hunk Kirk, is eliminated from the game straight away. He's just gone. And that's as a result of Leatherface. And we think, oh, he's the great threat. And he's sustained in that way because he picks up Pam with no problem at all. He drops her on the meat hook without any qualm, chainsaws Kirk's head off without any qualm. But then, I think I say it in the book, he suddenly starts to panic. He doesn't, you get the impression, he's either really, really excited by what's happened and his brothers and grandpa are going to be very pleased with him because he's eliminated a threat to the household. And if we're going to be blunt, he's got more food for the table and more food for the business. So there's all of those things possibly going on in his head. But there's also that idea that these teenagers are appearing out of nowhere. He doesn't understand where they're coming from because he looks out of the window, which again is ambiguous. Is he looking for Cook? Is he looking for Hitchhiker to say, look what I've done? Or is he like, I better clear this mess up before they get back? Or are there any more of them? So there's a clear confusion with him about what's going on. And then, of course, more of them turned up. Jerry turns up. Franklin and Sally are found patrolling the darkness, so he's got to dispatch them. So you can see it from his point of view. He starts off very, very strong, but then he sort of slides down the sort of the social hierarchy, like you said, and he ends up not only being bullied, he's beaten, he's verbally berated, he's told off for chainsawing through the door. I mean, that's a absurd moment in it involving cooking that it's just bizarre. You've chainsawed our door down. It's just like, why couldn't you just open the door and then catch Sally? But no, you have to chainsaw the door. So there's that telling off. And then there's, of course, he's wearing a female face by the end because he's cooked dinner. He's trying to serve dinner. So he puts on a female face, yet he's still wearing a male suit. There's just such a confusion about him. And I think that's part of his absolute horror is just the things that how he appears, the things that he does, and he wields that chainsaw as if it's nothing. He's spinning around with it. He's revving it up and down. There's no.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
There seems to be no weight to it. And I know that's possibly because it's a prop and it's been deactivated for safety reasons, but it only adds, and that goes back to something we said earlier about the B-movie nature of it. It only adds to it. It doesn't detract it. Oh, that's not a real chainsaw, or that chainsaw's not on, it's just sound. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that if we allow ourselves to enter the film world, this heavy piece of equipment, this very dangerous piece of equipment, it's just like holding a knife and fork for him. It's nothing. And that is what makes that chase scene I talked about earlier with Sally in the dark terrifying, because it doesn't impede him in any way. So yeah, he's scary.
You heard it here first, folks.
Take it from us, he's scary.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting in this respect is sometimes I talk to people and they say, "Oh, doesn't it take the magic out of film to sort of criticize it or to look behind the scenes or to interview people who are in the films?" And I've done everything with this film. I've read books about it, Gunnar Hansen's book, I've read your book. I've been to Texas. I've been to the house, which is now a bijou cafe and
Yeah.
restaurant,
Yeah.
which is, and it's also been put on a truck and transported like 100 miles from where it was originally because of a property development. I've been to the gas station, which is in the same place, and which still sells barbecue. You'll be glad to know. And when I stopped, I could hear people at the back, but I couldn't. There was no sort of way of going in. I couldn't quite work out how to go in. And I sort of started getting the jitters. I started feeling I'm in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they had like a bench with a chainsaw on it, all in raw iron. And I just thought, I'm not 100% comfortable. And none of that has taken away
Mm.
from the terror of this movie. And none of the, frankly, not great remakes and sequels and all the rest of it. Which retrospectively, there's always the sense that it might damage the myth somewhat. Or I don't think any of that has actually, this just is still what it is, a nuggetry
Mm.
piece of absolute, grisly horror.
I think part of it is because it was so problematic to censor. Its myth is twofold, isn't it? Really, there's the myth of it, and I think in a way, included in the book is a sort of an outline. I tried not to go too much into it because it's been done before, and also I was very conscious of the word count because obviously, The Devil's Advocates aren't massive books; they're quite slim volumes. I was aware of the word count, but I wanted to talk about the grueling nature of the shoot because I think that feeds into, as you said earlier, Rob Savage's thing about the rusty bath. It feeds directly into that sort of quality of the film. So I think there's a myth there, and then there's another myth about we were not allowed to see it, we're not allowed to watch it, but that's not true because although the BBFC wouldn't give it a certificate, they did say local councils could give it a certificate and show it. So, and I tried to sort of expose that, particularly the Greater London Council, because they showed it a few times, and it's sort of like it's got this thing about we've been told by authority or some sort of political organization, not that it is political, but there's some sort of organization telling us this is so scary, we don't think you should watch it. And so you've got all of these different sort of myths. And then even from my own recollections earlier on, that video cover, that VHS video cover has got big letters, uncensored. And then on the back it says, "Can you survive?" And then I think it says somewhere near the bottom something about this is based on a true story. Can you survive this? Can you endure or will you survive the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? So even before we've even sat down at a cinema in our own houses to watch this film, we've got a history of horror already on us. And then when we watch it, it's perhaps part of its horror is because of that subconscious sort of knowledge. But yeah, I think you're right about the things that were made after it. It dilutes it. And I think you have, like you said, you've got to push them wide apart and just say, if we're going to be honest, it should have been left. It should have just been left. And I think in a way, I've always sort of admired Steven Spielberg's ring fencing of Jaws, that whole notion that he's so steadfastly said, this cannot be remade. It just cannot be remade because it is probably sort of might ruffle some feathers, but it is a perfect film. It is just perfect in how it functions and works. And arguably, excuse me, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the same. It doesn't need any elaboration. It doesn't need a reboot. It doesn't need a remake. It needs to be left alone because it functions. It just absolutely functions. And I think that's why those sequels and remakes they're just impoverished.
Mm.
because they're not made under those grueling circumstances. They're not made in a political era where America was, it's a cliche to say it, but potentially at war with itself. It wasn't made by a young filmmaker who essentially sat down with his friend and said, what can we write that will sell? It wasn't made out of those remakes and reboots aren't made out of that sense of desperation or that sense of wanting to be seen. It's made by a studio and the script's gone through lots of executives and it's gone through lots of big budgets. It's gone through a process that isn't the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I think no, but having said that, and when I watch any of the sequels or the remakes, I do make that conscious sort of effort to just this isn't. I've got to view this as a new film, and I actually quite liked Marcus Nispel's remake. I thought it was good. It's just a shame that it was a remake. Had it just been a standalone original film, which is something very rare in today's film culture, it would have been really good. But it's not. It's taken a story and it's attempted to retrofit it and add reasons. And that's the beauty of the Texas Chainsaw. Hooper doesn't give us any reasons for this. He suggests at the beginning that economic decline and America is consuming itself might be the reason. Otherwise, they're just nuts. They're just absolutely nuts.
Or sun flares, or
Yeah,
astrology,
that's
or
exactly what
magic.
Pam says. Yeah, Pam's convinced. I mean, everything that Pam says comes to fruition because everybody mocks Pam, saying, I think Jerry says something along the lines, or it might be Kirk. I think it's Jerry says, "Can you listen to what your old lady's hawking me?" And it's sort of like, listen to this rubbish she's coming out with. But then as things escalate, they kind of turn back to her and say, well, what does it say about this? What does it say about that? And her astrology book, it's very well thumbed, it's very well read, and she's clearly invested in it. And she talks about Saturn and it being malefic and all of these things. And she's just basically saying everything's in retrograde, everything in a sort of cosmic, almost Lovecraftian way is heading to disaster. And as she communicates that malefic retrograde sort of rhetoric out of that book, the van is hurtling towards it as well in the form of the house, the Sawyer family. And it's just it's bonkers to think that that's what's really going on. There's this astral alignment that is gravitating them towards this house. And that just only adds to the madness because they're destined to
Yeah, but
die.
I was going to say, but there's an irony there as well in the fact that they should just go home, but they are going home. They are going back to the family house.
Yes, they are.
So it's
That's
like it's not it even going home isn't going to help you in this one. You can, as Thomas Wolfe said, you can never go home, or you'll get
yeah.
chopped up with a chainsaw. I think he missed that bit out. It's
Yeah,
important.
that's the whole Gothic thing, isn't it? That they're going back to the ancestral house. They're going on a day out to what should be a pleasurable thing for Franklin and Sally. They're going back to the place where they spent their childhood. They're going back to where their ancestors are. They're engaging with their past, which is something
And,
perhaps,
and also American past, it's the
yeah,
Sawyer family, Tom Sawyer. There's a
yeah,
swimming hole,
yeah,
that reeks of the Waltons,
yeah,
a sort of a pastoral American pastoral, which is
yeah,
utterly benign.
yeah.
And yet here we are. I wanted to go back just a second because I utterly agree with you about Jaws being a perfect film. I would utterly agree with you with that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a perfect film on that level. And I would put it with, I don't know, This Is Spinal Tap, Stop Making Sense, where they really dominate their
Mhm.
genres. I
Yeah.
don't think there are many films which are revenge of nature films which are anywhere near as good as Jaws,
Mhm.
including Jurassic Park. And ditto with horror films. There are many, many, many great horror films, but horror films of the level of Texas
Mm.
Chainsaw Massacre, I think, it's kind of like an Everest, and at me, I don't
I
care.
think they're coming out of an era, though, aren't they?
Yeah,
That's the thing. They're coming out of a time period where I think kind of like horror cinema was to an extent very much dominated by Hammer, and it just wanted to languish in the past. It just wanted to reinvent Dracula all the time. It wanted to reinvent Frankenstein all of the time. And it did go out a little bit on a limb with things like the Quatermass experiment, which is absolutely brilliant. The Quatermass films are fantastic. It tried Kung Fu and that sort of thing. None of it really worked. And then in America, you've got this group of young, it has to be said, young men who are angry at the world. They're angry at what's happening to the country that they've been brought up in. And they rebel against it or try to express it with some pretty devastating film. There's Last House on the Left, Wes Craven, obviously Night of the Living Dead from Romero, Texas Chainsaw from Hooper. Then perhaps a little bit later on, there's Carpenter with Halloween, and then in Canada at the same time, there's Cronenberg starting with Shivers and Rabid and all of those sort of things. They're made in a time period, and Jaws was made in that period as well. And it has to be said, Star Wars near the end of it. We're in a moment where cinema sort of crystallized, and it sort of said, these are like apex predators in these genres. These are the ones that you've got to live up to. And as much as I kind of appreciate them being made and enjoy all of them, it's kind of sad because they've set such an incredibly high bar. Sort of like you said, in any sort of revenge of nature film, it's doomed from the start because Jaws happened. It said it could be this silly, daft summer movie. It could be this ridiculous thing where, if we're going to be honest, there's a rubber shark chasing a group of fellas and its teeth bend when it chews on Quint. But it is so incredibly well put together. It's so incredibly well scripted. It's so incredibly well directed. It's got such stunning performances that it's perfect. If you're going to make a film of any genre, you should be watching it just to think, look at this. When I was teaching, I used to do sessions on film directing and blocking, and I would screen the bit where there's that one long shot in front of the beach and the billboard that's been graffitied with Vaughan, Dreyfus, and Hooper and Brody. And they're in this triangular formation, and the power shifts in the dialogue and the power shifts in the physical movement of the actors in one long continuous take is amazing. You just wouldn't see that now. And I'm not being critical. I just don't think you would see that level of directorial skill, that level of performance, that level of thinking about actor placement, actor movement, actor dialogue, relationship of the actors to the landscape. When they're talking about the shark, they slowly move apart so that the ocean fills the screen. It's like they're being swamped by the sea. It's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And terrifying, to be fair. It's the first time you see it, it's scary. It's scary film, and it's brilliant. And Texas Chainsaw, as you said, they're both pretty much on a par in terms of filmmaking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of many Spielberg oneers, as they're called.
Yeah.
There's a great one on the ferry that ends up turning around and going back, for instance, as well. That's superb.
Brilliant.
Possibly due to his work in television, that he's he's used to having to cut budgets and keep them tight. And although Jaws overran because of technical difficulties, he was trying to keep it low budget. Back to Texas Chainsaw, and let's talk a little bit about, because this was an interesting thing, and this is probably where we'll leave it for today. But the last girl, Sally, who escapes, and that scene where other people sort of turn up, and you just get the feeling that other people are not the answer. I mean, like, they just like run away the minute they see Leatherface. It's like, whoa, get out of here.
Yeah, there's no escape, is there really? I mean, at the end of the day, does Sally escape? Because she might physically escape, because we know she gets into the back of the truck and they drive off. But those last few shots of her, she's clinging desperately to the back of the truck. She's almost like she's holding on to something that is tangible and real, and more importantly, normal. I am back in normality because the sun's rising and we're back in the daylight. But as you said quite earlier on, this is a daylight horror film, and daylight doesn't mean anything to Leatherface. It doesn't mean anything to Cook. It doesn't mean anything to Hitchhiker. It's just different. That's it. It doesn't mean anything. But to her, in her clinging on to sanity, it's everything's safe in the daylight. We can see it. We're safe. But she's absolutely drenched in blood, which somehow miraculously appears. I've always thought I mean, she's been beaten up and she's been hit with a lump hammer only gently, and those sort of things. She has
Oh,
been.
but Hitchhiker's cut her. I used to wonder about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, he has, hasn't he? But it
Yeah,
just seems a bit like there's a lot of blood there.
right, right. It's
A
like she's been
bit
showered in.
Carrie-esque
Yeah,
blood. But
right.
she's drenched in it. And that may be symbolic, that may be something else, but she's absolutely drenched in it. And she's just laughing insanely. It's like the constant ambiguity throughout the whole film. Is she laughing because she's mad, or is she laughing because she's escaped? She's got through this ordeal. But even if she's got through that ordeal, she's got the trauma of what she's experienced and had physically done to her. But she's also got the trauma of watching her brother be chainsawed. I mean, he's eviscerated in front of her. So sort of disemboweled. And although we don't see it, we see Sally watch it. Exactly the same as Pam watching Kirk being chainsawed. So she's got all of this trauma, and it's just kind of like, is she in any way escaped from this? And she's not even a final girl because she's not really given any agency to fight back. I mean, there's that really, really disturbing bit at the dining table where she essentially says, "You can do anything to me, but let me live. Just let me live. But you can do what you want, but let me live." And Cook just goes, "We're not in the least bit interested in that. We have
Yeah,
no
yeah. This
interest.
isn't a Wes Craven movie.
Yeah, we are not interested in you as a woman, but we are, in a sort of contradictory way, definitely interested in your flesh, but not in that way.
Yeah,
We have no interest. We
it's like
want we
sexuality is too normal.
Yeah.
Even like rape is, and that, please no one take this out of context, but even rape is a human crime, and we are, we're aliens basically.
Mm.
We're operating on an utterly different level of
You could
existence.
argue that there's a different sexual response to the notion of cannibalism, that it is so taboo, it moves beyond other taboos and other crimes. But it's just the starkness of that statement and how quickly Cook dismisses it. It's
Yeah,
just like you
yeah,
said, it's not on their Richter scale of things. It
yeah,
is just nothing to consider. What is to be considered is more than likely the enjoyment from your prolonged torture and the celebratory moment in which they were hoping Grandpa would knock her out cold. And then, no doubt, the rituals of harvesting her body and consuming her. And the way that sort of Leatherface looks at her, again, this is another thing that like you're saying, the censors can't cut things out. The way Leatherface looks at her, and I think, if I remember, he keeps taking handfuls of her hair and doesn't pull her hair, but lets it run through his fingers. And I don't think it's too unreasonable to suggest that he's thinking he would look good with Sally's face, or he would look good with Sally's hair. So it's ridiculously disturbing, absolutely disturbing. But it's the flippancy of that. No, we're not interested. We're interested in far more weirder activity. And we're, like you said, they are alien, aren't they? They are from another world. And that then, I guess, ties into the whole thing about Saturn being malefic and things being in retrograde, that they are in their own planetary orbit. They're in their own world. And the house is its own world, isn't it? They have to travel to it. It's not in a suburban area. It's not in a populated area. We don't see any other buildings. We just see that one house. And there on its own, like perhaps it's like a moon or like a sun with everything orbiting around it. And because of that, it has its own internal logic. And that internal logic isn't the logic of the outside world. It's watching it again. It reminded me of the ending of Ari Aster's Midsummer, really, in that there's that ambiguity again about that what's becoming increasingly famous, Florence Pugh or Danny's smile. What is that smile? Has she gone mad? Has she found acceptance? Has she found freedom? Has she escaped? All of those questions that we ask of Danny, we ask of Sally. We sort of say, has she really escaped? As she might be physically free, but she may well be severely and understandably mentally traumatized after this event. And I think, and we talked about the time period in which it was made. There was that kind of element in that time period where success wasn't guaranteed, or there was at least an ambiguity about success not being guaranteed. So it certainly happens again in Night of the Living Dead, doesn't it? In that Ben, although he survives the night, I mean, he even survives Harry Cooper, to be honest. He survives the night. He comes out only to be shot by the sort of the redneck posse. So there's that idea that survival isn't guaranteed in the horror film in particular. And that kind of gets diluted, doesn't it? We very rarely encounter horror films now, although I could be corrected on that. I don't think we fully encounter horror films anymore where we don't think the hero's going to make it. There is still that, it's a kind of a weak term to use, but that kind of Hollywood-esque approach to it, in that the hero must survive. It can't be too downbeat. It happened in thinking about it. James Watkins's Eden Lake, which is absolutely brilliant film. Whether it's horror or not, again, I suppose is debatable, but it often appears in horror literature and in horror catalogs and horror lists. And in I've forgotten the name of the character, but she survives the ordeal with the teenagers to enter into what she perceives safety in the suburban environment. But it transpires the people that she ends up with are the family of the teenagers, the worst of the teenagers. And well, whatever happens to her, we don't know. All we know is she's locked in the bathroom with a couple of men, and that isn't going to end well. So I think it's there, and I think it's, it's refreshing to have that sort of quality to it, isn't it, really? It's refreshing to not sit in a film and think in the back of your mind, whatever happens, they'll survive. It's nice to have that element because we are dealing with horror. We're dealing with the unpleasant side of the world. So it's interesting. It's not the actual ending of the film, though, is it? That's Sally's ending.
Yeah.
The ending of the film is as we've said, Leatherface's bizarre ritualistic dance. So I think the proper ending is that Sally's traumatized and Leatherface has survived. That's perhaps the more horrific part of the ending. It's not just Sally's surviving but going mad, probably. It's the fact that the Sawyer family are still active. They're not being caught. They've not been sort of brought to justice for not just what they've done to Sally and her friends, but to all the other. Because we see all of those cars when Kirk first and Pam first arrive at the house, they lift up the camouflage net, and there's just loads and loads and loads of cars underneath it. And they're clearly all the people that they've lured there and killed. So where's the justice for them? And I think that's part of the beauty of it. It's part of the horror of it, isn't it? That they live, and Sally's left to live with something traumatized or something horrific. But it is good to have those sort of endings in a horror film. It destabilizes us, it stays with us. I mean, the ending of Eden Lake is terrifying. absolutely terrifying. We don't need to see what goes on in the shower. We know what's going to happen in the shower. So and I guess the same with Danny in Midsummer. It raises a question of, is Danny going to go back to America? But why would she? Because she doesn't have a family anymore in America. And she seems to have been accepted by the cult more than just because they're using her as an instrument to get what they need. She seems that bit where they're all screaming together, that seems adjacent to their plan. That seems like we might have struck gold here. We might have actually got another young woman to join our group, and that's good. I like those sort of it's horror. It's bound to have something in it, isn't it? Really.
I think it's a radical way of looking at the universe horror offers, in that when we're talking about them being from a different planet almost, there's a sense that in this universe there is no justice. In this universe, you're not going to obey Wes Craven's rules and survive. It's not that. It's not a horror. It's not. There's nothing meta in this. There's nothing ironic. That's not going to save you. That's not going to save you as a spectator. You're not going to be able to watch this and have a wink. You're right. There is sort of comedy, but it's an absurdist. It feels more like Samuel Beckett comedy than any sort of camp. Even though you do have a man dressed in a woman's skin.
Yeah.
That's camp. That if you want camp, you're going to get a woman's suit via Ed Gein. You're not going to get amazing. Listen, we could talk about this for hours, and maybe we will. Maybe we'll talk about it for another few hours at some other juncture. But I want to ask you as a final question for your recommended film book, please, James.
There's a few, so I'll just choose the one that I always go back to, one that I always lean into and look at and engage with and find always something new in it. And it does, just by coincidence more than anything else, connect with Texas Chainsaw. Planks of Reason by Barry Keith Grant. It's a book that is nearly as mythic as my experience of trying to get to see the Texas Chainsaw, in that I could never, ever get hold of it. And then one day, rather randomly, it just appeared on eBay, and I just bought it straight away. I didn't even put in a what's it called, a bid. I just sent them the money.
Yeah.
I want this book. That
Take my money.
Yeah, here's double. Just take it. I'll come and collect it wherever you live. It's just got such a fantastic collection of texts in it. There's obviously Robin Wood's introduction to the American horror film in there, which is just fabulous. And he talks about the return of the repressed. There's a fantastic essay on Jaws in there, and there's Christopher Sharratt's essay as well on the idea of the apocalypse, and there's Texas Chainsaw. But it's not just those sort of, for the time it was released, those sort of contemporary horror films, but there's like a historic section as well. So you're kind of getting a selected plotted history of the horror genre, but engaged with in lots of different and increasingly sort of complex ways. And it sort of ends sort of, I think, around about early mid 1980s. So you've got this nice body of work. It's just very accessible and really sort of easy to read and sort of pull things from it. It's also printed as if it's been typed on an old school typewriter. So it's got this kind of nice aesthetic on it as well. But yeah, that's one of my big go-to books. If you're going to engage with the horror genre, I think that one is a really good key point in looking at how you can analyze individual films and then put them into a wider social or political context.
Excellent, James. I really appreciate having this conversation. Appreciate that recommendation as well. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been a great time, as you can tell by my constant engagement. It's been fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.